I am Eric Moore, and it is an honor to be here with Mr. Jeff Pollack this morning, Chief Strategy Officer. And I flew down from Dallas. Many of you I've met before. And so thanks for having me back. I guess they didn't read the report that we gave the last time, said that we didn't want that Eric Moore guy back in this neck of the woods. So thank you, thank you. How's everybody doing this morning? Everybody good, enjoying your lunch? Awesome, awesome. Well, we understand that you had a chance to do some pre-sessions in the room adjacent to us, and thank you for that. This is really the meat and potatoes of why we're here today. But before I introduce my guest here this morning, I just wanted to share something. Many of you heard something that's a variation of this in our community conversations, but I wanted to share something that came to me this morning, specific to the hydrogen issue and how pervasive it is, not only in this area, but nationally as well. And so one of the things that came to mind is that this session is really about connecting policy to the person, right? Because policy is something that's up there in the clouds sometimes, and you don't know how it impacts you. And so today is about connecting policy to the person, and the person is inextricably linked to a community. And so today our goal, one of many sessions to come, is to provide clear and informative space to work and move forward together, seeing the community as being a critical part of the value chain of this phenomenon that we call hydrogen. This is your seat at the table, and we're honored to have you. And let me repeat, this is your seat at the table. And as I mentioned before, there'll be many more opportunities, but this is the first. So it is an honor to be here for you today, and it is an honor to have this as an opportunity to listen. Before we start, I'd like to, before I introduce Jeff, I'd like to go over a few rules of engagement, if you will. Many of you know I'm a former college Texas A&M football player, and one of the things that the referees would always do before the game is say, you guys play nice together. You guys play nice together, especially before that game that we played against that team down in Austin or that team in Baton Rouge. You know, there's rules, there's white lines, and you play within the white lines, and everything will be fine. And so this is about the white lines. And if Amy can put these up on screen, which I think she has, I'll just share the rules of engagement today. Listen actively and respectfully to others' perspective. Even if you disagree, it's okay. It's okay. But today is about listening. Speak from your own experience and avoid making assumptions. I oftentimes make assumptions before I fully know, and it's a human thing. But before making assumptions about other experiences or beliefs, avoid personal attacks. No name calling. Everybody's got a name that their mother gave them, a God-given name. Call them by that name. Or any other behavior that would be perceived as disrespectful or harmful. This is a safe space. This is a space to grow. This is a space to learn. Allow everyone a chance to speak. At the Q&A section towards the end, just raise your hand and we'll get to you as much as we can. I'm on your clock. We're on your clock. Be mindful of time constraints as much as possible. And by following these guidelines, we hope to have a meaningful and productive conversation that allows us to learn from one another and ultimately build a stronger community. So with that, I want to briefly introduce my friend and gentleman to the left. It's amazing when you sit down and talk to people, the things that you have in common. The one thing that I learned about Jeff is that oftentimes we work jobs that sometimes are a force fit. It's like, man, I really don't want to be doing this. Am I really cut out for this? Man, I got a degree in business finance, but I'm working, as an art director. It's not a good fit. Very seldomly do you have an opportunity to work with people who are born to do what they do. And Jeff is one of those people. When you're a little kid, you dream about what you want to become when you grow up. And when you're a little kid, you hope that if you get married, your spouse shares the same beliefs and hopes. And the gentleman to my left is doing what he sincerely wanted to do as a little kid. And I admire him for that. I admire you for being here today. And so with that, I want to introduce Jeff. May I, first name? Do I say Mr. Pollack? Jeff's okay? I want to introduce Jeff, and we're going to go through a series of questions. So with that, Jeff, say hello to the people.
All right. Thank you so much. Maybe I can, just by way of introduction and before anything else, thank you all again for being here. I know that everyone else has somewhere else to be right now. The fact that you're here suggests that you're interested in information about what we're up to at the port. I sincerely appreciate that. I am going to do my best to honor that, be as direct, forthcoming with that which I can answer, that which I understand as I can. As Eric mentioned, we intend to do this, repeat this exercise as often as it's needed to make sure that everyone who wants a seat at the table in the conversation has it. So thank you very much for being here. Shall I say a bit more about how I ended up in this chair?
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, we had some really good conversations earlier. Just, what's not on your official bio, just share, a little bit about your background, your position, and really the passion for what you do. But also, Jeff, why you think this is a critical time in regards to hydrogen and where we are as a society and as a community.
Okay, yeah, thanks, that's great. I'm glad we scheduled this for 3 hours. Yes, ma'am? You can't hear me back there, okay. Well, so just by way of introduction, right, since I'm hoping this will be a conversation and even though we're sitting up here, my title at the port is Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer. I've been at the port for almost 5 years. I came to the port to start the planning practice. I was originally the director of planning. The position I'm in now did not exist when I came to the port. My purview at the organization now effectively includes all aspects of planning, all aspects of environmental. You all likely know the two directors of those departments. They're Leslie Root over planning is here. Sarah Garza over environmental planning and compliance is also, I think, well known to almost everyone in the room. And it's a privilege to stay out of their way. But what has changed in my position really over the last few years is the opportunities that we've had as an organization in new energy, namely hydrogen, and in our active decarbonization strategy. And both of those roll up under me. Both of those are sort of, dream pursuits. The fact that I get to spend all day, every day talking about those things is something that I still have a hard time believing. But I've been in this community for 16 years. I came here 16 years ago thinking it was for 18 months. My now wife was coming to do a postdoc at the university. She told me she was bringing the dog. We had a Chesapeake Retriever that I was in love with. And so I came to, and 16 years later, we're still here with a couple kids and 10 dogs later. So, just maybe last bit of introduction. My background is in environmental science. I grew up in Florida, in the water. In a momentary lapse of judgment, decided to go to school outside Chicago at Northwestern, studied environmental science there, and then in grad school studied coastal environmental management in North Carolina at Duke, and spent better part of a decade on the coast in the Carolinas. Got out of Chicago literally within hours of having a diploma, swore I would never leave the coast again, have not left the coast since. So that's the path by which I have found myself in this chair, and it's a privilege to be here. With respect to hydrogen has emerged. I mean, the buzz around hydrogen, particularly over the last 18 months or so, with some of the federal legislation that's come down, has really been, I think, unlike anything we've seen in the energy sector in the last 100 years. I mean, this idea of a transition is really more like a revolution. Why hydrogen? I mean, hydrogen as an energy carrier has been well known for centuries, really. Since before the internal combustion engine. Hydrogen is a really small and finicky molecule. It sheds electrons pretty easily, and it ends up as an energy carrier, without being overly technical, unless y'all care to get technical. It is typically used as an energy carrier, not as a direct fuel. So it is flammable, not particularly explosive, but flammable. But most of the energy applications of hydrogen don't actually involve burning it directly. Think about fuel cells in mobility and the way we may power our cars with hydrogen. It's about moving those electrons on that molecule and releasing energy in doing so. So I think what we've seen happen over the last few years, and there's been plenty of federal policy and incentive that's driven this, is hydrogen, because you can make it without a carbon footprint, the attention on hydrogen as a flexible energy carrier has has really changed, and it's not really a matter of technology changing as much as it is circumstance, policy, and I think a universal commitment to decarbonization of the energy economy that has changed. Maybe I'll pause there. I think there's a lot to say about how hydrogen's produced, how we're going to produce it, but maybe I'll follow your cadence, Eric, and we'll see what folks want to hear about.
No, you're fine. And by the way, thanks for getting to Texas as fast as you could, even though you weren't born here. I can't let that pass. So you mentioned that it's not, technology is a part of it, but it's more so about the state of mind, because as we know, hydrogen, was introduced, a couple of decades ago, right? It was all part of our effort to be energy independent and not rely so much on foreign energy sources. So what do you think influenced the policy change? Is it more awareness? Is it the drumbeat? Is it the overall environment of just becoming more environmentally sound? What do you think impacted that?
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting. I think it's a combination of everything you just named. I think we find ourselves both in North America and in Europe in political climates that are incenting, at least hospitable to, if not incenting, decarbonization strategies that I think we couldn't, that we did not see, or that the power brokers in the energy economy did not see as either political priorities or economic viabilities 4 years ago. I would still argue that's kind of 3 decades too late, but that's where we are, and I think we've got some ground to make up. The other side of that is the money that is available through the federal administration, through the Biden administration. So having just come back from the World Hydrogen Conference in Rotterdam, I can tell you that the Inflation Reduction Act and the production tax credits for hydrogen and for renewables to power hydrogen, in the case of electrolytic hydrogen, are the bar, really the bar that the sort of international policy community is following. I mean, it's a case of the right policy levers at the right time. So maybe actually that's a good opportunity to kind of level set around how hydrogen is made and what the connection to federal policy is. So hydrogen is typically produced one of 2 ways, generically speaking. Either breaking up a natural gas molecule, a methane molecule, which is CH4, you break it up, you have free carbon, joins oxygen, you have a carbon dioxide stream. It's a very pure carbon dioxide stream, and you have hydrogen molecules. Or breaking up a water molecule, H2O, you have free oxygen, you have free hydrogen, and there is no carbon emission associated with it. If you want to make hydrogen from gas, which is how almost all of the hydrogen on the planet is made today, you have the opportunity to capture that CO2 stream because it's relatively pure, very pure actually in this spectrum of emissions, and it's relatively economical to capture. If you do that, and you do something constructive with that CO2, or at least keep it out of the atmosphere, most folks refer to that as blue hydrogen. I'm trying to get away from the color spectrum because I think it's confusing as hell. We instead talk about carbon intensity and measuring carbon intensity. But most of the hydrogen produced in the world today is from methane molecules with that CO2 stream just released to the atmosphere. The low-hanging fruit is to decarbonize existing hydrogen streams by capturing that CO2 and doing one of a couple things with it, either upcycling it into another commercially viable product. You can blend it into concrete. There are a variety of things you can manufacture that have CO2 as an input. You can make synthetic fuels with CO2 as an input, like like methanol. Or you pressurize that CO2, you get it into a liquid state, and you inject it deep underground into geology where it can be contained indefinitely. We're well endowed in this area with geology that is well suited to contain that CO2 indefinitely. It's something that the port is very heavily involved in. I'll try to sidestep that unless folks want to get into it, but it is a key differentiator for this area. As it turns out, on the federal policy side, the Inflation Reduction Act, which followed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, lagged about a year behind, has direct tax incentives for the creation of hydrogen from water. And that piece of legislation single-handedly changed the hydrogen value chain in the U.S. because, and we can say this directly, if you look at the project pipeline at the port and all of the proposed hydrogen production projects, where 2 years ago, those were pretty evenly split between companies that wanted to make hydrogen from gas feedstock versus from water. Now, 90% electrolytic. 90% of the proposals are to produce hydrogen from water, not from gas. So much lower carbon intensity, and generally smaller scale projects. And that's where the policy driver has been a real catalyst. So when you talk about hydrogen from water, a lot of people will refer to that as renewable hydrogen because the idea is to take electricity generated from a renewable source, a source with no carbon intensity, solar or wind, drive an electrolyzer to break up a water molecule, run an electric current through water, split it into hydrogen and oxygen. So people refer to that as either renewable or electrolytic hydrogen. And again, the majority of the projects that we see in the area now are proposing to do just that.
So for context, we're going to start the first half of this off at a very high level. There's a lot of complexities. One of the great things about hydrogen is its diversity as an energy source. But I want to take a moment to just take one step back. And you mentioned how this area is very well suited for the hydrogen model. And as we know, Texas is one of the largest natural gas producing state in the country. Within that context and strategically, how do you see the state of Texas, obviously this area in particular, being a leader and being a strategic player in the hydrogen movement as we move forward? Is that a good thing? Are we in a good place geographically?
Yeah. I mean, there are a combination of attributes that are truly unique in combination. I mean, there are other places in the world that have some subset of them. There are very few places in the world that have the full complement. But as well endowed as the state is in natural gas, and the shale plays are extremely gassy fields, and so there's like 5,000 BCU of gas produced for every barrel of crude that comes out of the ground, and there are constructive uses for that gas as opposed to flaring it with all of that carbon impact on the atmosphere. As well endowed as the state is in gas, it's equally well endowed in renewable assets. I mean, the state leads the country in wind, number 2 in solar. Hopefully that changes to number 1, right? So there's sort of this equal opportunity in hydrogen production in gas feedstocks and electrolytic hydrogen. Again, the gas feedstocks coupled with carbon capture because the coastal zone of Texas has literally world-class geology for the containment of injected captured CO2. So what are the other attributes? I mean, and what are unique to the port? The fact that we have spent the last 100 years, especially the last 50 years, moving liquids, the idea of moving liquid hydrogen carriers like ammonia or methanol, I mean, get to use the same infrastructure. The largest purpose-built ammonia carriers on the planet draw 54 feet of water. Our ship channel is on the way to 54 feet, right? So the potential to reuse infrastructure, to repurpose existing infrastructure is really profound in this port. Maybe since I just mentioned ammonia, maybe I should take a second and speak to that.
Please.
So hydrogen is a very small molecule. And hydrogen as a gas is very light, and it is very inefficient to move it as a gas. It's not, you don't get a lot of energy density in that. You can fill a ship very easily and not have a lot of in terms of total energy density. It's not a very efficient way to move it. It's also hard to keep it from escaping because it's a small molecule. So if you want to move it any long distance, any distance beyond which moving it in a pipeline makes sense, moving hydrogen by pipeline is done all over the country, all over the world very effectively. But if you want to move it any greater distance, it makes sense to turn it into something else, a larger molecule that can be pressurized to a liquid more easily. It's more efficient to pack more of it into a ship, for example. Over the last couple of years, the marketplace seems to be consolidating around the idea that ammonia is the, at least initially, the most efficient way to move hydrogen from place to place. Couple reasons for that. Ammonia is a much larger molecule. You can turn it into a liquid with about half the pressure and half the temperature reduction that it would take to do the same for hydrogen. Ammonia also has a variety of uses in and of itself, namely supporting fertilizer. The ammonia marketplace is going gangbusters because most of the ammonia production on the planet is actually aging out. It's something like 80% of the ammonia production on the planet is past its design life for those facilities. So turning hydrogen into ammonia and allowing that ammonia to either serve the traditional energy ammonia market or be a carrier for hydrogen, where, say, ammonia produced on the Gulf Coast could arrive in Western Europe through the Port of Rotterdam, and then that ammonia molecule, NH3, is cracked, broken back into nitrogen and hydrogen, and the hydrogen is available for local use. That's the prevailing thought about the way that ammonia can move hydrogen around the planet. We move ammonia all over the planet today. It's in rail cars, it's in vessels. There are a small number of vessels that are currently powered by ammonia. We see more ammonia-powered vessels being laid. If a ship is moving ammonia, you have a certain amount of that just boils off during the transit, and that what's called boil-off gas can be used to power the ship. So there's some efficiency in moving ammonia by vessel.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so we've got one more question, and then we'll get to questions from the audience. So is it safe to say then that infrastructure-wise, we're very well built for this phenomenon?
We are.
And we've got at least the will and the understanding that this is a safe, diverse, and future-looking type of energy source, right? That's safe to say, right?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very direct about quantifying risk. There's no energy source on the planet that doesn't have a risk associated with it. I think that it's incumbent on us as a port and us as a community to be honest and quantitative in assessing and comparing risk for different energy streams. Hydrogen is a flammable gas. It's not an explosive gas, and its flammability, relative to other, traditional fossil energies, I mean, it's less prone to explosion than sort of traditional fuels. I mean, there's a way to quantify and compare that, and I think we should have a very open conversation
Yes.
about that. But the potential for hydrogen to decarbonize society is very real. And so, if I may just say one more thing about that. That's what this is fundamentally about, right? And I don't want to be overly philosophical, and I don't want to be overly sentimental about it. But if everyone in the room, and I won't ask for a show of hands, but I mean, I'll certainly raise mine and say that I personally consider climate issues, climate action, to be the single biggest existential threat of our time. Hands down, full stop. Nothing else in terms of natural resource considerations, environmental considerations, nothing comes close. And nothing is relevant unless we, as a global society, link arms and find a way to take global action on climate. That's not a paid ad. In fact, I will probably have some political pushback from that comment, but that is unequivocally where I come from. I hope that that's the prevailing sentiment in the room.
Yeah.
If we are serious about that, this is what transition looks like. It is about, I mean, it's messy, it's incremental, but decarbonization of the global energy economy has to also include making sure that we are providing for the energy needs of the global society. Depriving the disadvantaged segments of our community and communities abroad who can't, for whom energy access is a question mark as a way to decarbonize. That is not a viable strategy for decarbonizing the energy economy. It has to be coupled with providing energy in all corners of the world, right? And so it has to be done at scale. You can't just turn off the faucet without turning on another one.
Understood. I've had a chance to go to Africa and Europe and Asia, And these are very robust conversations in all corners of the world. One last question, and then we'll get to Q&A from the audience. What is the Horizons Clean Hydrogen Hub? HCH2. Say that really fast. And then why did the port apply for this grant with the Department of Energy? You touched a little bit on it earlier, but if you can give us just a couple of minutes on why this is important and what does that actually look like on the ground?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll try to keep this really short because that was a 1,000-page application. There's a lot that could be said about it. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is it's almost 2 years old at this point, included $7 or $8 billion for the creation of at least 4, up to 8 or 10, what the DOE, Department of Energy, is calling regional clean hydrogen hubs. So locations where there would be a concentration of production of low carbon hydrogen, hydrogen produced with a low carbon footprint, whether that's by producing it from gas feedstock and managing the carbon emissions, or producing it from water powered by a low carbon energy source, wind, solar, geothermal. That legislation says that at least one of those hydrogen hubs is going to be in a part of the country that has historically been an oil and gas producing region. It also makes it clear that the lower carbon intensity of the hydrogen produced in the hub, the more favorably DOE is going to look at it. That Horizons Clean Hydrogen Hub is the name of the regional hub application that the port submitted to the Department of Energy as the prime applicant. That hub concept centers around the Port of Corpus Christi, but actually includes about 40% of the state of Texas. It includes 11 proposed designated subrecipients of federal dollars, one of which is the University of Texas to do some analytical work, one of which is the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is a research arm of DOE, to do some analytical work. And then it includes 9 private sector customers of the port who would be hydrogen producers of various scales. Of those 9, 5 of them would be in this general area. 4 of them are in other sort of the corner flags in the other parts of the hub, one in Matagorda County, one up in Pecos County, one down at the Port of Brownsville. We've got some partners in Duval County, although they're not proposed subrecipients. Of those 9 projects, 8 of them are electrolytic, renewable hydrogen projects from water. One of them is from gas feedstock. The only one that is proposing to use gas feedstock coupled with carbon capture is the one in Pecos County. So all 5 of the proposed subrecipients in this area are from using renewable energy to power electrolysis of water. Last 20 seconds on this, unless y'all have additional questions, I'm happy to talk more about it, of course, but the port is really uniquely suited as a prime applicant for a hub concept. We're in the business of building infrastructure. We're a government entity. We have a public procurement policy that mandates transparency in a way that differentiates us from hub proposals that are built around just private entities. And so within it's almost $1 billion request. You can ask for up to $1.25 billion, but we asked for just under $1 billion. And of that money, the idea is that about a quarter of it would stay under the port's purview for some combination of administration of the hub, direct investment in community benefits across the hub. I mean, something to the tune of $20 to $30 million dedicated to central community benefit investments. And then a couple $100 million dedicated to central infrastructure for which the port will be responsible to make sure it happens in the right way, in the right place, at the right time, and serves all of the projects in the hub. What we don't want is sort of a free-for-all, Wild West investment in infrastructure that serves only a single project interest. I don't think that's the right thing to do for the hub. It's not the right thing to do for the port. It's definitely not the right thing to do for the community. So keeping the port involved in that way provides a degree of centrality and oversight that I think truly is unique to our hub proposal. So stop there. Happy to talk about that at any length that y'all care to.
No, this is awesome, man. I'm kind of geeking out on the stage here, man. My brain is expanding just listening to this. Everything I researched and everything that you're saying, there's a certain synergy in it, and so thank you for the clarity. So with this, we're going to, a moment, I got Amy over here. It's time for questions, and we've got on this side as well. So if you can raise your hand, we'll get a microphone in front of you. This is your seat at the table. And an opportunity to ask the expert. But before we get to that, has what we've shared thus far, has it been helpful? Has it been demystifying to some degree? As you can see, I'm sitting next to an encyclopedia. And if I've got to go to war with somebody, I want to go to war with a guy like this, to be quite honest, or someone that's going to create a new paradigm for this area and for the state of Texas. So has this been helpful thus far? Okay, I see a lot of head nods. Okay, questions, please. This is an opportunity, please. Yes, sir. We'll come right around to you. And one of the things that I heard earlier from several folks is, I'm here to learn, right? And so as you're learning, please know I'm learning as well. So your question, please, sir.
All right. Boy, there's a multitude. I have a ton, as
Okay.
Jeff, I know, and I'm just going to ask one or two
Yes, sir.
for right now, and then let others ask questions. First of all, I have to say that you need next time you do this, put yourselves on this side because I'm blinded by the light. Okay? I mean,
Isn't that a song title, Blinded by the Light?
Yes,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
is.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
and I really can't see y'all.
Yes.
All I see
Honestly,
is
that might be better
silhouettes.
for you.
Right.
I'm not
Well,
much to look
no,
at,
no. But I'm serious.
Yes,
It's
sir.
very,
Sorry about
very. A lot to digest here that we have not heard before. Okay, which I will comment right now that it would have been great and more helpful for this community had many of the things you said today been disclosed a year ago, okay? Just flat out, I'm gonna say that. You indicate that of the 9 private sector companies, I guess, or corporations that are involved in this, that 5 of them would be local, and that all 5 of those are going to be engaged in the production of hydrogen through electrolysis. Is that correct? That's what you stated?
It is. Can I add one corollary, full transparency?
Sure.
I want to make sure I'm being clear about this. Those are, of the projects to which we're proposing to direct federal funds, it's 5 local projects, and yes, they're all making renewable hydrogen. We do have a variety of other commercial inquiries, project interests, to which we're not proposing to direct federal funds. Most of those are also electrolytic hydrogen. There are a couple projects that are proposing to use mixed feedstocks, water for their first phase, maybe gas in a future phase, one that's starting with gas, but there really are only 2 projects in our portfolio right now that are discussing gas feedstock. So yes, but there are more than just 5 in aggregate.
Okay. And you clarified that some of those would be transitioning from natural gas as feedstock to water, some of those, or are they all
No,
going to go?
all of those 5
Okay.
are purely electrolytic proposals.
All right, so that begs the first question. How much water
Yeah.
is going to be required? Not piecemeal, okay, but in totality. I mean, you have
Yeah.
a master plan. I assume you have a master plan, which we can maybe talk about later. But how much water then is going to be required
Sure.
of all of these facilities, and where are you going to get that water? And I want to ask a question about the ammonia for a moment,
Okay.
because this is something that, you indicated that ammonia is now the more viable way of transporting hydrogen, because as far as I know, there are no hydrogen vessels currently, no fleets to transport hydrogen right now. And if it's going to be by ammonia, let me just go ahead. You said that when it reaches its destination, it will have to be broken down again, right? In between hydrogen and...
Depending. Do you mind if I answer a couple of these things?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, my
And
brain's not that big.
Yeah,
I'm going to lose most of this
If you'll
stuff.
just address those, and I'll pass it on.
Let me work backwards. So there have been a couple. So you absolutely can turn hydrogen into liquid. The process is much the way you turn natural gas into LNG, like Cheniere does. I mean, you cool it, supercool it, and pressurize it. You can do that with hydrogen. It takes a lot of energy to do it. And ammonia you can do by lowering that temperature only about halfway relative to hydrogen and half the pressure. You can liquefy hydrogen. There are places on the planet where that's being done. There has been some vessel-borne movement of liquefied hydrogen. It's not the most efficient way to move hydrogen, most likely. There are certain places on the planet where that will make sense. We have a ton of liquefaction capability here. It's going gangbusters on LNG and will for the foreseeable future. Could there be a day where liquefaction is focused on something other than gas? Yeah, I think that's possible. But right now, ammonia is probably the prevailing way to move it. Part of the reason for that is because ammonia, and I should have mentioned this, can also be used directly as fuel. So, and a lot of what's driving this is national policy in North Asian companies, Japan, Korea. Japan in particular, for example, has tremendous coal-fire power plant network. And Japan federal policy, and basically policymakers in Japan have decided they cannot meet their national energy needs if they decommission their coal-fire power assets that are not at the end of their life. However, they've made very aggressive national decarbonization targets. One of the ways that you can do both is by blending in ammonia directly into a coal-fire power plant and combusting it. You can displace, you lose a little bit of energy density, but you displace a lot of carbon. And so some of that ammonia, and in fact, probably the largest volumes, will initially be used as a direct fuel for decarbonizing coal-fire assets around the planet. Some of it will be cracked, but that process of turning ammonia back into free hydrogen and free nitrogen, I mean, we as a technologically are really just foraging into that. So some fuel ammonia used directly. Working backwards in your questions. Water use. So let me give you some numbers. In general terms, and there is some variation with technology, but it's really a mass balance thing, right? Because you're taking a water molecule and there's only so much hydrogen in it. It takes about 4 gallons of water to produce a kilogram of hydrogen. You amplify that up, 1,000 kilograms, a ton of hydrogen takes basically 0.004 mgd per ton of hydrogen. The 5 projects I mentioned in the hub proposal together would produce about 900 tons per day of hydrogen. So 900 times 0.04, somebody who's smarter than me can do the math on that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have that number. I mean, I can do, I can pull up my phone just like you can, and do the calculation, but I didn't come with that number because I, didn't think to, in that oversight on my part, but let me do that math.
And is that, team, is that something we can post, that answer to that question later? As Jeff looks for that number, just keep in mind that we'll have follow-up to this with answers that we maybe can't get to here. And again, keep in mind, this is the first of several moving forward. So we're learning in real time, but we will have a follow-up opportunity for questions that we either run out of time to or will position us for the next go-around. Did you want to say something real quick?
Yeah, so that ends up, for those 5 projects, course numbers ends up being somewhere in the ballpark of 3.5 mgd. That you need, I mean, I'm putting all sorts of parameters around that number, right? That is for the hydrogen part of those projects. I do not know, I mean, my crystal ball is broken. None of those projects have reached what's called financial investment decision, right? Those are the 5 local projects for which we proposed federal dollars. The reason I thought it was more useful to give you the ratio of 4 gallons per kilogram of hydrogen is because that's a better common denominator. And so as we get a clear idea of which projects make it to FID and what's happening when, you can get a sense of what the water demand is. Producing hydrogen from water uses water. There is no question. Compared to some of the other industrial activities in the region, it is not actually a tremendous water demand. In aggregate, if we become a world-scale hub for hydrogen production, and a lot of that comes through electrolysis over time, which will take, a decade or more to get to any kind of scale, there is a water demand. Where does it come from? It's going to come from wherever the rest of our water comes from is the simple answer, right? I mean, right now, all water users in this region have their straws in the same cup. All of our water is coming from the same place. So as new water resources are developed, whether that's the Evangeline Aquifer, whether it's desal, all of those water users will be met by that. When we undertook permitting around desal in 2018, hydrogen was not a glimmer in anyone's eye, including mine. Could the water demand for hydrogen production come from desal? Absolutely. Was that the idea for desal for us? Absolutely not. Is it the driving factor? No, it isn't. We did ask the National Renewable Energy Lab, again, the research arm of DOE, to look at the thermodynamics of if you produce water from desal and then turn that into hydrogen, does that make energetic sense? Are you chasing your tail energetically, having used energy to produce water and then turn that into another energy form? And the answer is, and I was very skeptical of that, the answer is you're not chasing your tail energetically. You can actually produce water by desal pretty efficiently in terms of energy consumption relative to the energy density of hydrogen if you break a water molecule. If anyone wants to geek out on that math, I can share that report with you. But we asked him to look at that about 18 months ago before we talked about desal as a possible source for water for electrolysis. It's also important to realize if you're producing water from hydrogen from gas, you're doing that one of 2 ways. It's thermal reformation of gas, and it also takes water. And depending how you cool your equipment, it can take more water. So there are considerations. You need water for any aspect of hydrogen production, absolutely, just like you need water for any industrial production. With respect to water resource development, it's not what we're here to talk about today, but let me just leave one last thought since you asked the question. I am a firm believer that the answer to that question for this community has to be about inclusion and not or. I think that's also the case when we talk about meeting global energy needs. Like, this is the era of and. I heard somebody say that last week and I loved it. I think that as we bring new water resources to bear on this region, we should be sending water in whatever form, raw water or treated water, to whichever water user we can serve most efficiently. And that's a matter of geography. It's a matter of which water comes from what place. But we should spend as little money as possible moving and treating water, is my personal opinion. Right now, half of the municipal electric bill goes to moving and treating water. All of our water is coming over 100 miles, right? And most industrial users, a lot of industrial users, are getting water that's fully treated, potable water. There's a tremendous amount of energy used in moving water to treatment plant, treating it, and then moving it again. So I'm of the opinion that water should be delivered to wherever it can serve most efficiently. So to answer your question, where does the water come from? In my opinion, it should come from whatever water resource source we have that can be utilized most efficiently geographically and in terms of the level of treatment.
Awesome. Great. I want to be respectful of our agenda here. So let's, any additional questions? And then, as I mentioned earlier, the second round of questions will focus on community impact, taking it again from the more scientific aspect of it to more tangible, what does this mean for me and my local community? So with that, any additional questions? Question from the back? Yes.
Good afternoon, Jeff. I'd love to commend the port for having such a transparent forum and making yourself available. Could you elaborate on the electricity needs here in the region? Most certainly, you do have a backdrop of wind turbines, but as you talk about these scaled projects, in your DOE application, does that also consider, in fact, the electricity needs? And then what could that potentially look like for the region, supporting not only the industrials, but perhaps the community's grid?
Yeah, thank you.
It's a good question.
It's
Good
a great
question. Yeah.
So in the DOE application, we had to model and provide real project-specific data on all things. Electricity demand, sources broken down by source, how much of that for a given project is proposed to be brought over the wires and purchased from the grid by way of paying a virtual power purchase agreement or a REC for renewable generation. One of the strengths of our application to DOE is the fact that of the projects in the hub proposal and even the projects that are outside the hub proposal, most of them are not just a single developer, and many of them involve a company that has a long pedigree in renewable generation. Many of them are renewable developers who have assets in the region or developing new assets. So one of the strengths of the application and of many of these projects is the fact that, at least to some percentage, many of the projects intend to supply their own electrons, either behind the meter or by feeding new renewable electrons into the grid. There's a positive side and a negative side of that. The negative side is transmission becomes the limiting factor, So even though we have ample generation, we have a transmission constraint. Because of ERCOT regulations, AEP you can't invest in new transmission until they have contracts for demand. You have this chicken or egg problem. And so the timing of new transmission being available ends up being a limiting factor, and it's a real consideration. The flip side of that is the renewable demand of these projects is incenting, and the production tax credit for renewable generation in the Inflation Reduction Act is incenting this tremendous investment in renewables. That is unequivocally a good thing for the region, because if those electrons, or a portion of them, find their way onto the grid, and the grid is bolstered to accommodate that new volume of electrons, the transmission, it becomes a more resilient grid. That is good for all users, full stop. So there is a timing issue, there is a transmission issue. It's one of the things that's keeping me up at night. I mean, we as a port are working to try to accelerate that. We're paying for some of the front-end engineering that's required by AEP for the grid upgrades, with the idea that those costs would then be transferred or socialized. And there are a variety of ways to do that. We hope to be able to pay for those. We haven't been able to yet because, again, there's some ERCOT limitations. It is one of the ways I think that the greater region benefits from this investment, because it does ultimately translate into a more robust and resilient grid.
It's very good. It's a good question. Thank you. One additional question, and then we'll make a quick transition. Yes, sir.
You guys.
Microphone. I would toss mine, but that'd be a safety regulation issue.
Okay. I just had a question about the sequestration. What geological formation are you looking to inject in, and what surface locations are you looking at seriously?
Yeah, I'm happy to do this. I just want to, just out of respect for anyone who's here to talk mostly about hydrogen, I mean, let me make sure that there's no one else who wants to, because there are some folks in the room who have more knowledge about that than me in terms of the geology. So, and we actually have a parallel series to this. Let's talk about CCS, literally. That is also, we're going to begin peppering the calendar with a series of conversations. So let me just make sure before we go down that rabbit hole that no one else has hydrogen-specific questions, if that's okay.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Pollack, I've got to kind of like Errol, I've got too many questions, and I do want to say something about when you say it's 4 gallons of water per to get 1 kilogram of hydro. It's we're using two different systems there. One is the US and one is the metric. So just kind of need to get this kind of roughed out where everybody's on the same and understand that.
I can
I'm
explain
trying
that if
to-
it helps, but okay.
I'm trying to understand when you say that there are more places that are, or businesses that are interested in doing the water for the hydrogen, and you say we're in an ideal situation, the port is, but we know that we're water stressed and have been, and I don't see that we're ideal for that, because no matter what comes online, it's still years down the line before something gets resolved about water supply. And I don't see it at all as being a good idea to stress our water supplies until, we've got alternatives. And desal, regardless of everybody's opinion there, it needs to be combined with other water sources. We can't keep looking at one. We've
agree.
got to make a combination.
Totally
So why is what is the reason to not, it seems to me, decarbonize, you want to use the gas? I'm just thinking, because I'm trying to understand this. Why aren't we pushing for that instead? Because the gas is the one thing we've got plenty of.
Look, first of all, really appreciate the sentiment, really appreciate the question. Let me try to speak to each part of that. First of all, the gallon per kilogram thing is because we in this country talk in volume. We talk in gallons. The kilogram is because customers and recipients of hydrogen like to talk in tons. It's all metric. I know it's a mixed metaphor. It's really hard to get away from it. On the water side, so in terms of timing, first of all, because we do not yet have a single hydrogen project that has reached financial investment decision, that is to say there's not a single project that is past the commercial point of no return here. It's important to acknowledge that. That means that we are years away from anyone. There's hydrogen production happening here today from gas feedstock. Of these new projects, we are years away. The earliest, the first movers are talking about production that realistically is probably early 2027, and those are quite small scale projects in terms of water and electricity demand. So there is a potential for the timing of new water resource development, whether that's Evangeline Aquifer or whether it's desal. It actually could line up pretty naturally with some of these projects. The other thing is that hydrogen production from water is limited by the electrolyzer marketplace. Right now, the biggest electrolyzer in operation on the planet is 20 megawatts, to use the power size. And we are seeing projects that are proposing hundreds of megawatts. And there is a 3 or 4 or 5 year wait list for electrolyzers. We do have some projects that include an electrolyzer producer that will fast track a little bit. My point in saying this is that this isn't happening tomorrow. This is a slow burn. Hopefully not too slow burn, because I think, frankly, as a global society, we can't afford for it to be too slow. But it is not happening tomorrow. These projects, again, the furthest projects have a lease option with the port, not even a binding lease yet, an option, site control. But none of them have reached financial investment decision. The earliest of those reach it in about a year, financial investment decision. So that's on the timing of the water side. Would it be better to pursue hydrogen from gas and manage the carbon? I think that is a really valid question, and I think to some extent will be borne out by the marketplace here. If we as a region don't come up with a cogent strategy to solve for water, if we cannot get the transmission piece right on getting renewable electricity here, it will have a cooling effect on investments in electrolytic hydrogen, no question. In which case, I think we will see some projects revert to gas feedstock, pure speculation, or we'll see new projects with that interest. Perhaps it will have a cooling effect on the electrolytic side, no question. You can get to a world scale hydrogen production using gas feedstock in a way that you can't with electrolysis. And so if we want to get to world scale as quickly as possible, you're absolutely right, gas is the way to do it. But the only way to do that responsibly with reduced emissions, without climate impact, is to capture that carbon and do something with it. It's too much carbon to upcycle all of it. Some of it will get reused, but some of it has to go in the ground. We are working, as you know, came up, right? We'll talk more about this, on that centralized system for managing the carbon. We are committed to that, not just to support hydrogen production, but because it is an existential necessity. We have got to divert emissions out of the atmosphere. That also takes time to develop. The first well for CCS probably isn't on the ground 36 months at best. I think that's ambitious. So we have a timing problem. We also have had considerable pushback on CCS from folks who I know want to see global decarbonization. So I'll be honest with you, for me, trying to balance, trying to divine strategies around decarbonization with these different levers, we have to find something that we agree is the lesser of multiple evils, that is a path to progress, even if it's not perfection. Sean says that, I love it. There has to be a path forward. So in my opinion, it's all of the above, but if we as a community either can't get there with power and water and want to use gas feedstock, then we have to have an honest conversation about carbon management, and we have to get okay with that. Some of that carbon has to go back in the ground. So there are multiple levers at our disposal, but at some point we have to start pulling some of them. They can't all be wrong. So, I mean, that's my answer to you in sort of the relative merits of electrolysis versus gas feedstock.
So the wisdom and the vision is having the courage to take the steps on the path. And a lot of the things that we know today, the technology, the awareness, in some degree, learning along the way will make us better in the future for this. And so I love when you answered that, when you asked that question, you were literally ciphering it in your mind, trying to make sense of it in your mind. And that's not unlike many of the decisions and how the decisions are made here. What are the different variables? How does it impact all the entities involved? And then what's the best way forward collectively, realizing that where we are today, to some degree, maybe a slightly different place to where we are tomorrow. And so I love the openness. I love the transparency, Jeff, of those answers. I love the sharing of the insights. And so one of the things that I wanted to highlight before we transition is the technology component again. 20 years ago, we as a nation went down this path, and technology and our understanding and awareness of it is a lot different. And I think that curve will be increased in the next 4 to 5 years, as you mentioned. I think we'll be in a lot better place. So with that, I want to shift a little bit to the community aspect of what we're talking about here today. I had several questions, and many of those questions were asked by the audience, so that really excites me from the perspective of we're on the same page. So as we talk about the community, and as we talk about how the hydrogen plans benefit the broader community, I want to spend some time on that. What does that mean for those who live in the area? What does that mean for us potentially economically? What does that mean for us in regards to becoming a beacon of hope and a beacon of light in thinking differently about our energy resources and energy distribution?
Yeah, so that's kind of a lot. No, it's a great question. And,
Yeah.
and honestly, in some ways, we should have led with that piece, right? Because, I mean, that's the crux of it, is what does it mean for those of us who live here. Our community benefits team is in the room, I think, and I should defer to them on any detailed questions that people have, but
at least tee it up. At
yeah,
least tee it
so,
up, and because I understand that there's a community benefits plan in the works, and we can speak a little bit more of that in detail, and maybe we'll make that the Q&A. But just from a high level, just a very, very high level.
So the criteria for evaluating hubs, a full 25% or more, is based on your plans for disseminating benefits from investments in the hydrogen value chain into the communities where projects are taking place. And of those benefits, you have to be able to demonstrate that 40% or more of them will be directed to communities that are historically disadvantaged. within our hub, if you use the EJ screening tool that EPA has produced, 75% of the counties in our Horizons hub qualify as disadvantaged. So there is no question that the potential for significant investment and uplift, meaningful investment in communities exists within the hub proposal in a really profound way. If you put those in buckets, it's about workforce development in all forms. So it's about creating truly new career opportunities in a clean energy sector that does not exist today. It's about creating a path for workforce transition for the fossil energy workforce that has a sort of a slow taper and downsize over the next 40 years, and a path to sort of to reinvestment and retooling, retraining as appropriate. So there's the workforce bucket, there's the direct investment in sort of community quality of life and institutions. And that direct investment doesn't necessarily have to relate to the hydrogen value chain. It is about having two-way engagement on the ground in communities within the hub to understand the bespoke community priorities within a given community. And that, we've had to demonstrate to DOE, at least on paper to date, because it is, this is about planning for activities that would be funded through the hub, what that looks like. Who are our partners in Duval County? Who are our partners in Matagorda? Who are our partners in San Patricio and Nueces? In each individual community, who are the on-the-ground local institutions with whom we would be partnering to understand the priorities of a given community where a project is proposed? And I think that's a real difference in sort of this opportunity compared to maybe sort of the historic treatment of community benefits. This is about individual community priorities that are defined from within the community. I think that's really important. And the investments need not necessarily relate to these projects, right? I mean, communities need all sorts of things. Then I think the third bucket that I'll mention, and then I'll ask the Rosar and team to jump in, is what are sort of the ancillary investments that we can make in STEM education, in just sort of in general educational uplift. Like, how do we raise the common denominator in the communities in which we're working? And again, those are bespoke solutions that are community specific. In this community, what is that? Maybe it looks like a fleet of our mobile labs and decarbonization and hydrogen specific criteria that we take out. Each of those labs touches 10,000 students a year. That looks very different in Pecos County. It looks very different in Matagorda County. So again, community specific solutions, but a big part of this is how do you invest in school age students and audiences of various types of great, truly diverse audiences, to make sure that there is a flow of information that can be transformative. Not just information about projects, but a true and meaningful educational opportunity that's audience appropriate. So I'll stop there. And Rosara, do you want to add to that?
And that's fine, Jeff. Thank you for at least teeing it up. Rosara, you want to add a little color and texture?
Well, I'm nothing if I'm not color, Eric, so thank you. Rosara De Los Santos Bailey, Director of Community Relations for the Port of Corpus Christi. Eric, you always have such a poetic way of putting things into words. And so you started this session by saying this is everybody's seat at the table. And recently I had an opportunity to sit with my good friend Lamont Taylor, and we talked about having a seat at the table, and sometimes you get the seat at the table, but it's not fair if we're not all playing with the same amount of chips. And that's what I said to Lamont, is when you come to the table, it's only meaningful if we all have the same amount of chips. And that's what we're trying to create in our community benefits plan, is some equity for each of us, that we all have a seat at the table, but we're all playing with the same amount of chips. And so as this plan evolves, what we are asking for is for people to come to the table and work with us. You also said, let's play in the lines.
Yes.
Right? And play nice and call each other by our God-given names. And we don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree on what is right for our community moving forward. And so we will ask many of you, it's why we asked for your email addresses when you responded to the invitation, to serve with us on this committee and help us decide what are the right things, what are the things that are lacking the most in this community, and where can we create the biggest impact? Where can our dollars be invested to create impact that drives our community forward in the most meaningful and impactful way? We don't want to come up with that answer by ourselves. That's inviting our own voice to the table. We want to invite everyone to help us create those solutions. Another thing we've been talking about, and I stepped out just a minute ago to go up and talk with Workforce Solutions of the Coastal Bend, and they've got people from the governor's office in there and some really influential, some people talking about the future of workforce in our community and throughout the state of Texas. And what I said to them is, what's important as we evolve as an industry and as we create the future jobs through hydrogen is that we start to reduce barriers. What are the existing barriers that are preventing the future workforce from becoming who they can be? And so Jeff spoke a little bit about education, STEM, inspiring people, sparking interest in these type of jobs, but also what prevents people from having access to these jobs? Is it not just as education? Is it things as simple as childcare? Is it things as simple as transportation? What do those things look like? And they're often things that we are not mindful of. So we want the best minds who represent the community to come forward and help us think of those things in each of these areas that Jeff spoke on. So again, we'll be reaching out to say, who wants to sit with us? Who wants to play with us? All chips in. So I'm happy to answer any questions. It was a rather lengthy community benefits plan, and it's certainly setting us up for a future community benefits strategy of success, but one that I will not allow to move forward without input from the community, and I will always be available to listen and to take away what message you have.
So we have and thank you, Rosaria, for that. And we've got a few minutes for a few additional questions. But one of the things I just wanted to crystallize before we begin to close is we've just been on a wonderful journey this morning and into this early afternoon. We started on the highly technical side of this equation, but we came full circle, a full 360 degrees to the more human, emotional side of it. And so as an organization and having the opportunity to share the stage with such expertise and share the floor with such expertise, it's just comforting to know that this process and this journey is being thought of holistically. From the most acute technical aspects of this journey to the most heartfelt, enduring personal aspects of this journey. And so as we move forward, are we going to get it all right all the time? No. But we're moving in the right direction for the right reasons, with the right expertise and with the right partners on the table. And so with that, are there any questions specific to the community outreach part of the equation before we close? I didn't see any hands. Was that a hand?
I'm sorry. Let me how could the port even submit an application to the DOE about community benefits without having obtained any input at all from the community? Okay?
There was
Again, we're working backwards, okay?
Errol, just to correct
but
the record, there was quite a bit of input on that plan. I mean, that was not done in a vacuum.
Was anyone in this room, did anyone in this room participate in any of those?
With all due respect, the most disadvantaged communities in this region are
Right.
not represented in this room. So I wouldn't. I mean,
Okay.
This is not the audience we targeted for that engagement. Just in all fairness.
Shouldn't they be part who
Look,
you have targeted?
we-
Okay, let me ask my question. I want to know what the monster looks like, okay? I want to know where the pipelines are going to go, where the facilities are going to be located, okay? I want to know whether or not additional natural gas pipelines will be required. I already know that Cheniere has to tap into the Whistler pipeline in order to expand its project. So there's a lot of infrastructure that has to be put in place. And what I'd like to know is what that looks like. Have you got a schematic? And secondly, with regard to the community engagement and environmental justice communities, the town of Gregory is an EJ community, okay? With limited English proficiency, rampant, poverty rampant, and they're being surrounded by these facilities completely. Arcadia E-Fuels is now planning on putting its location to the north. All of these facilities are going to be surrounding this area, and I'd like to know what it looks like.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me whatever. Look, I'll stay as long as it takes. Right. I think I'm here. I'm free till 2. If you want to stay after, I'm happy to do it. Let me speak to what I think I just heard you raise. Couple things, starting at the back. Not every industrial project, hydrogen project, smokestack in this region is associated with the port. Far from it. When we are not the landowner, and in the case of the Arcadia E-Fuels that you just mentioned, not on port property, literally just heard about that project for the first time 2 weeks ago, when we offered to share with them the investments that we see coming with the hope of some consolidated and shared infrastructure. So I know there are folks in this room who have long advocated against the port whenever we acquire new property. When the port is not the landlord, our access to information and our ability to shape projects is limited, right? So look, I know you don't like that, but that's the truth. So, of course it's the truth.
Well,
We-
hold on.
So
hold-
the comment,
yeah.
it's all right.
Okay,
Let me
okay.
walk through that. The comment was we have no control over our tenants. We can show you what leases look like. Frankly, factually, you're absolutely wrong. I can, if we need to publish a lease redacted to show you what our controls are, we can show you those. So that's an incorrect statement. So correct the record with that. With respect to Arcadia and anything in eastern San Patricio County, if it's not on port property, it is not a port project. And so while I'm extremely sensitive to the sense of overwhelm and the implication of having multiple projects, that is not necessarily associated with us in a way that we have any more information than the rest of the community. That's not to say we are not trying to make sure there's a cogent strategy for shared infrastructure. But please understand the difference between that which is us and that which is a private investment. With respect to where this goes, I do have a slide. Let me grab that. So where does this go? What does it look like? I have a slide that shows 2 existing electrolytic hydrogen facilities. This one, which one is this? This is the one in Spain, owned by Iberdrola. Their American subsidiary, Avangrid, is actually a partner of ours on a couple of our hub projects. You see the hydrogen storage, you see the electrolysis stacks. This is next to what used to be the Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. Again, behind the meter solar electrons driving electrolysis. This is what electrolytic hydrogen looks like. Depending on where that goes, there may be other industrial process. This is not what ammonia production looks like. I didn't have a good picture of that because I've been focused on this, on the hydrogen piece. But this is what hydrogen production looks like by electrolysis. In the campus like this, you can note the absence of smokestacks because there's no emission stream from it. Of the 5 projects, proposed subrecipients within our hub, 1 of them has a lease option with us right now. It's on the south side of the Inner Harbor. 3 of them have lease options under negotiation, 2 of which are on the north side of the Inner Harbor, 1 of which is in Nueces County off of the Inner Harbor. So right now, the majority of these individual projects are focused either on the Inner Harbor or on property that's in close proximity to utilize existing maritime infrastructure on the ship channel, because none of these projects in and of themselves, or even in aggregate, will generate the volumes that justify an investment in a new dock. There will be new docks. The first of the new docks built to move hydrogen-related products will be in the Inner Harbor, but each individual dock that the port builds can move 10 million tons of liquid a year. If you add up all of the hydrogen and potentially ammonia production associated with it from our hub application, you don't get near that 10 million ton mark. There are other world-scale hydrogen-related projects interested in this area, using gas feedstock in some cases, that get into larger volumes. Those are decade-plus long projects, multi-phase projects. Those are the ones that are more likely to be in San Patricio County. So that's what the geographic distribution looks like. The first mover projects, though, unequivocally are Inner Harbor associated, existing industrial sites using existing infrastructure, because it's the only way the economics work initially for first movers. You know, it's the only way you can capitalize on a first market advantage is by using existing infrastructure. So hopefully that answered your question, gives you a little bit of graphic. I mean, happy to share more about that, but again, not every hydrogen project that's interested in this area has come to us as a potential tenant of the port.
Jeff, I want to make sure we answered the questions with regards to Gregory. Did you get that?
I did. I mean, I absolutely recognize what the sort of prevailing socioeconomic condition is in Gregory. We internally have talked a lot about what an infusion of benefits looks like in Gregory. We've initiated conversation. I think our engagement in Gregory has historically been pretty atrophied. We recognize that. I think we're committed to working on that. I think we've started that. We do not have a project right now that is within Gregory city limits. We are mindful of adjacency and the potential actually to provide some neighborhood career opportunities for a community that needs them. So I think recognize everything you said, agree with what you said about what Gregory needs, and I think we're working on how to engage in the right ways.
And just to clarify on the community benefits side, while some of those conversations have taken place with regards to education, workforce development, and we've had those in-depth conversations, the lift of the community roundtable is written into that plan with the intent that we get the voice of the community, and that part of the application is where it's fluid, where together we come up with those solutions. We're just not there yet. We're very much in the initial state of that piece. Jennifer.
So first I want to say it is very exciting, to look at solutions for capturing carbon and solving one of the, as you said, the world's biggest problem that we have right now facing us. And that's got to be heady in some ways. And I have a lot of questions that, as you talked more about water and desal, but to address the community benefits program, I'd like to ask, are those benefits going to be directed towards the communities that are impacted most by these projects? And
yes.
Not just by where you have leases, but actually where your customers are and where the impact is felt, because you have properties that you lease to customers, but then you also have customers that just by use of the channels, are your customers and provide tariff income. And a lot of that income is coming from San Patricio County.
I know I rarely give a single word answer. In fact, I get a hard time about it from my boss all the time. But the answer to that is unequivocally yes. And we have been and are sort of held to account on that by DOE. I mean, that is exactly what the questions in the application force is, a granularity of planning that and to Rosar's point, not all of those strategies for how that happens in San Patricio County or any of the specific communities within it are defined. What we have done is the precursor to that, which is talk in our application, right? How engagement begins to make sure that the strategies are on point and from within the community. I mean, that's what I was trying to not so eloquently highlight earlier. I think historically in a case like this, the federal administration would have accepted whatever strategy you propose. Okay, you've got a proposed strategy. That's not what this application required. This application was not give us the strategy, tell us how you are going to devise a strategy that is of a particular community. So the answer is yes. Do we have all the answers for how that happens yet? No, we don't.
Ms. Fulton has a question, but it's for me, but I want everybody to.
Okay, I'll keep my mouth shut.
Well, that's who I thought it should be directed to, since you are in charge of the public relations. So I think the point was raised about reaching out to communities, especially, and I think that this is where a lot of the communications are just not that great, because we are talking about communities that maybe one part of it has a bit more educated or population, whereas another part of it does not or doesn't, speak English, or and they don't know and they can't read or the English literature that may get put out there. But I think I raised that point earlier that a lot of the stuff going on with the Army Corps applications and all of these things, most people can't comprehend, much less work. I mean, it drives me insane when I'm trying to look at these applications and then trying to make a reasonably educated comment where other people walk away because it scares them to death. And that's where I believe that there's a problem there. And if that's the case, what are you going to do to reach out and actually physically and any other way communicate with these communities that may be directly impacted? My other point on that is, when you talk about giving back to them, it shouldn't just be, okay, we're going to give this organization X amount of money for, their charitable. Shouldn't be this thing. It should be like, okay, we're going to go give the Hillcrest people a couple of million to rebuild their church. Something a little bit more productive than just, a little bit here, a little bit there. That's not really giving back.
We agree with you.
All right.
No, I appreciate those comments, and Jeff's giving me the eye, but
No.
I really do. I really appreciate those comments. I will always say, hydrogen's a complicated topic. For me, I'm not a science girl. As we went through this application, I told Jeff every day I got to work, and then the first thing I Googled is, what's hydrogen? Because that's not my specialty. Working with the community is where I am. That's where I jam. And so, I say to Jeff, talk to me like I'm a third grader. And that old video, how a bill becomes a law. I think everything should be communicated that way. If we could communicate everything the way that little video showed us how a bill can become a law, then I think we would all understand what's happening in every industry. I get digestible information is important. I am recognizing the need for translation into Spanish. If you notice today, we asked, do you have needs to translate into Spanish? I'm picking up on these things. Maybe I'm a little bit late to the game, but I'm recognizing them and working for us to do better and to be better. And we will continue on that. And where you see that we are flawed, tell me. Because I want us to make those improvements where we can. It's small steps, but we're getting there. You will see, I know there was a question of, can we get back to you on the answer about the water? We are standing up a website specific to this particular.
A hub-specific website.
Specific to this project, where we'll put the frequently asked questions, and it's my dream for Jeff to let me look at his responses, and I've given him the questions, and then he answers them, and then I say, do I understand those answers? Because if I don't, then the general public, that's me, doesn't. And so we're working towards that. I get it. It is complicated, and not everybody in the room is as smart as Mr. Pollack. At least I'm not.
I might be just by sitting here, osmosis, right?
Well, we could hope. But we are working towards that, because it is important for people to understand. And the more people understand, the more questions we will have. And the more questions we have, the better we are as a community. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Rosario. I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. That's it. Schoolhouse Rock. With that, being respectful of time, we've got time for maybe one more question, but our experts will be available for a few minutes after this official session closes. Is there one more question? If not, we can close it out. And again, this is the first of several. So a lot of learning along the way, but this is the first of several. Any additional questions before we officially wrap?
I'm sorry.
Can
Just one. I think it's fairly brief. The application you indicated was for around $1 billion.
$993 million.
Okay. And did you ask for any funds whatsoever from federal? I guess it's federal money.
Yeah,
right?
DOE.
For purposes of desalination.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Want the long answer to that? I know you do. The one of the strengths of the application is that every dollar in it is proposed for either the community benefits piece and some of the hub administration, but either community benefits, hydrogen production, not even production of ammonia or other derivatives, but true hydrogen production, so high efficacy, or central infrastructure that would serve multiple projects under the port's purview. There are a lot of other hub applications out there. There were 33 that were invited to submit full application. We swallowed one of the other hubs. There were 32, probably, we don't know if they were all submitted. A lot of them are proposing dollars for all sorts of other things. One of the strengths of our application is that we're able to show a high efficacy, high return on federal investment, focused really on what their priority was, which is low carbon hydrogen.
There's also a match required, right?
There are matching funds, one-to-one matching funds, but those are, to be clear, that's on a hub-wide basis. In our case, conservatively, we can show, really 20-to-1 private investment. The potential infusion of private dollars into the region associated with these projects is profound. And so the matching piece of this is not a challenge.
All right. With that, And survey at the end, you can scan the QR code. Thanks for holding it up. And we got your pre-thoughts, we'd love to get your post-thoughts, and if we can humbly ask that you fill that out, that will help inform our next session. It will also help inform the FAQ that Rosario mentioned earlier. So on behalf of Crosswind Communications, our founder is sitting at the back of the room, as well as Nika, another colleague. Thank you so much for your time today. And let me stand up and shake this man's hand, because it takes a lot of courage to come out here and do what we're doing today. We're not just some big entity with a logo. We're human beings. We're people who work hard every day here at the port, and the things that we do to make a difference as best we can. So with that, give yourselves a big round of applause, and thank you for your time today. Thank you, Jeff.